The following presentation is a Bernacki and Kraus production.
Successful conversation, if I do say so.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. Founded in 1706 originally as a Spanish colony, the city has seen its share of history over the course of a few centuries. In recent years, the once peaceful community has seen a surge in illegal activity thanks to the work of a shady lawyer in the making.
A chemistry teacher with a newfound identity.
And the heart of a cartel seeping through the underbelly of the city. While fictitious in nature, the likes of a Jimmy McGill and Walter White have provided audiences across the world an in-depth look into how people make morally good and bad choices.
As an audience, we are left to justify the consequences of our characters' moral decisions.
This character study is just one of the reasons we enjoy the cinematic world Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould have created, and we hope you do too. From the time Jimmy stumbled upon Tuco Salamanca's front door,
to the first time Walt introduces himself as Heisenberg,
this podcast will cover an episodic review of two of the best television dramas from the last 20 years. I'm Joseph Bernacki.
And I'm Alex Kraus.
And this is The Truth is How You Look at It, a Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad podcast. Good evening, fellow Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad fanatics. My name is Joseph Bernacki, and welcome to the inaugural episode of The Truth is How You Look at It. I'm joined tonight by my co-host and a good friend of mine,
Alex Kraus.
Thank you for joining me tonight, Alex. He's going to be my recording partner throughout this series. I'm really happy to have him on as a part of the team. This is a brand new podcast we're starting up from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and recording in Canada on a nice January evening. We're going to be covering the entire Better Call Saul series as it continues to be on TV on AMC, with Season 6 hopefully airing later in 2021. Tonight we're covering the first episode called Uno. It debuted February 8th, 2015, nearly 6 years ago on AMC. The ratings at the time were quite impressive. They were 6.88 million in the United States, nearly 7 million, and when you take in other countries, of course, that's a big premiere for a cable network.
That it is.
Before we get into the cast and then a rundown of the episode and our thoughts and discussion, just want to talk a little bit about who we are for our fellow listeners out there. I'm a graduate of the University of Regina. I got a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism, worked on for 4 years between Winnipeg and Regina in Saskatchewan. Made a lot of great friends out there who I know might be listening in later. Thanks, fellas. And I'm going to be looking for work again in this next year and looking to see where things go there. Alex, why don't you say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, and I graduated from U of W with criminal justice degree and hoping to continue my career in law at U of M someday. And why don't we talk about how we first got into the show and what attracted us to Better Call Saul?
Absolutely. I found it really interesting. For me personally, I didn't watch the show when it first aired, as I was said, February 2015. I came across the show. My dad was watching it on TV. He caught an episode of the second season, which we'll get into later on, where one of the main characters, Mike Ehrmantraut, a regular from Breaking Bad, he's trying to put a kibosh on what the cartel is up to in the second season. And there's a great scene where Mike is chasing down a truck in the desert and trying to set some different traps, and I thought, okay, this seems like an interesting show. Maybe I'll give it a chance. And then I did a little bit of reading up on the internet and was like, yeah, it's a pretty interesting crime drama here, legal drama. I'll give it a shot. And so I started watching a few episodes of the first season. I liked it a lot, and then I eventually binged watched all of Breaking Bad. So as I was saying to my friend Alex, I'm one of the rare few viewers out there who started off in Better Call Saul, the prequel series, and made its way into Breaking Bad. Of course, with Better Call Saul still being on. Alex, tell me about how you started.
Funny enough, my father was also an influence on it, but unlike you, we watched Breaking Bad beforehand, and were quite excited when the sideshow Better Call Saul was announced. So we're looking forward to it, and we knew about Saul's character from the show, and we're excited to see how his story beforehand related into how his character is developed, as we know it in Breaking Bad.
So yeah, with that underway, we're going to be discussing Uno today, episode 1. That is the title they came up with. It was written by Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould, directed by Vince Gilligan. He started out, he did a lot of great stuff for the X-Files, and he was the series creator of Breaking Bad, so his fingerprints are all over this first episode. Our main actors that get introduced in the first episode are Bob Odenkirk as Jimmy McGill, Jonathan Banks as Mike Ehrmantraut, Rhea Seehorn as Kim Wexler, Patrick Fabian as Howard Hamlin, and Michael McKean as Chuck McGill. And as some more series regulars join the show, we'll give you a shout on what episode that'll be. So in the first scene, we are treated with a black and white futuristic look after the events of Breaking Bad. We are seeing the employees working in a Cinnabon in a shopping mall. We don't know where it is yet. There's some really cool extreme close-up shots of the restaurant and of the workers making cinnamon buns. The song on in the background is Address Unknown by the Ink Spots. It's a great choice from a great group that was very popular in the 1930s, 1940s jazz scene. And the lyrics, which I'll talk about in a bit, they serve as a connection to the events of the end of Breaking Bad.
Aye, they are quite fitting to his current situation and how it ends at Breaking Bad.
So we see our lead actor Bob Odenkirk playing Gene Takovic. Takovic's actually released as for information later on in the series, but he's a store manager, and already a few minutes into the music scene, we see Gene looking rather paranoid at a customer who he thinks is staring at him directly. He even starts walking towards Gene, but to his relief, the man sees someone he knows in the hallway and ignores Gene behind the counter. Now, Bob does a great job at portraying the paranoia of this character in the scene, and it's important as audiences might not be fully aware of where this scene is taking place. Did you have any thoughts on that beginning, Alex?
Yes, of course. It gives a small insight into the character at that time, the feeling of paranoia after the events of the previous show. And this is our first introduction into him in the series. And we'll see a bit more further as it comes along. This is the first gleam that we have.
So, for the viewers out there that have seen Breaking Bad, unlike me, what's really important about this, and we'll probably pull up the clip for you either at a later time or in another episode, but towards the finale of Breaking Bad, Jimmy says to Walt, Saul Goodman, really, but his real name is James McGill, my best case scenario, I'll be working at a Cinnabon in Nebraska. And Walt says, well, you're still part of this whether you like it or not. And so it turns out, we do find out shortly after in this opening, it is in Nebraska, as we hear a weather report talking about the state. So we know that Saul was able to follow through on what he said to Walter White, and he is working as a store manager.
It ties a bit into the lyrics that you're talking about in the song that was playing at the time. The idea of how the end result, the address that they're looking for, is unknown, but he ends up getting something that doesn't quite fulfill him in the end.
Throughout the series, I found the music director did a really poignant job at choosing appropriate songs to fit the mood, to fit the theme. Address Unknown, the lyrics serve as a really great connection, which we'll talk about later on, how Jimmy got to where he was, where he's basically, he can't be recognized by anybody for fear of potentially going to jail and losing everything that he built up during the events of Breaking Bad, and then later on in the prequel, Better Call Saul. So we transition to a street with a few houses, and we see Gene inside a house making a stiff drink with Drambuie. The sound of what could be the American Shopping Channel is on in the background as snow continues to fall outside. And the saleswomen are talking about Renoir paintings as Gene changes the channel to Animal Planet, probably, and then a Nebraska weather report. And then Gene looks outside in concern of the snowstorm. We see him draw the window curtains, and there is a great close-up shot of the drink in his rocking chair, rocking with the chair as he goes toward a closet in the house. Gene takes out an old VHS tape out of a shoebox with some important items. There is some foreshadowing in this moment, which we'll talk about later on in the series. In fact, Season 5 that just aired in the past year, very important item is also in that box, but we will talk about it at a later time, so stay tuned. Finally, Gene plays the VHS tape, and we hear the younger, more enthusiastic persona of Saul Goodman in 3 different commercials. And as the final commercial airs, the scene cuts at the words "Better Call," and it cuts to the quick show theme intro of Better Call Saul. That is our first scene. Now, Alex, I wanted to ask you, overall, what are your thoughts on this scene from the future?
I think when he first enters the house, the transition from the start of that scene to the end is very different. You have the wind that's howling. It sort of alludes to an empty household, as well as the Cinnabon empty future. It's what he ended up getting, but there's no betterment in sight. He's sort of where he is, and he's feeling quite alone in this household. So with the drink in hand, he's just listening to empty commercials go on, and he sort of aspires to get a glimpse back into the past, something that he lost, and that's when he goes back for the tape. The difference you hear is you can hear the howling in the house, the creaking of the chair, very hollow feeling. But as soon as the tape starts playing, it fills the room with the music, and of course, more importantly, his voice. I really liked Bob Odenkirk's acting in that scene. As you could see on his face, this sort of nostalgia for the past, I saw in his eyes anyways. This feeling of longing sort of comes to the forefront. He's less lonely in his chair.
Now, when you first saw this scene, were you surprised that Saul or Jimmy followed through on his words to what he said to Walt, and that he has ended up in Nebraska?
I think it's a bit of irony, more or less, that's where he ended up. But that was his best case scenario as he saw it, and sometimes you got to be careful what you wish for, right? Because he doesn't seem quite too happy right there.
Now, you have seen Breaking Bad and how the ending plays out. Tell me your thoughts. The beginning of the scene, discuss that initial paranoia, which we'll talk about later throughout the series. Already we see him having a fear of being recognized. Do you think it's a little bit overdone? Do you think, as a character, do you think he's overreacting when he sees somebody sitting at a table looking at him? Do you think it's a little too much? Or do you think he really should be scared of, even though he's far away from New Mexico? What do you think on that?
I think that is a permanent effect of everything that he's gone through. As you see later in the show, the events, involvement of more insidious forces, he ends up seeing some things. And we see this in Breaking Bad, and we'll see this future in Better Call Saul. And these events that transpire definitely carry on through to the end of the series, where he's a completely different character, but still facing the problems from the past.
And then you touched on this very well. What do you think of that look on Gene's face in the final part of the scene, where he's basically staring at his former self from the past at these commercials? What does that nostalgia mean to him? Where is this all going for him? Do you think he wants that? Do you think he wants to somehow recreate that in Nebraska, or is that just he just wishes he could go back and ultimately he knows he can't? What do you think?
Recreate, I think he's smart enough to know that'll never happen. Relive it through the tapes themselves. I think he's emotional enough for that,
yes. Hey, I'm a civilian. I'm not your lawyer anymore. I'm nobody's lawyer. The fun's over. From here on out, I'm Mr. Low Profile, just another douchebag with a job and 3 pairs of Dockers. If I'm lucky, a month from now, best case scenario, I'm managing a Cinnabon in Omaha.
You're still part of this, whether you like it or not.
I'm sorry, I don't think so.
All All right, so we're moving into our second scene. This is a huge time jump now. We were going basically from the present day when it was shot all the way back to 2002. This is Albuquerque, New Mexico. We are in a county courtroom, and a bunch of teens await anxiously while the rest of the people in the court look rather annoyed and kind of disinterested. And meanwhile, our protagonist, James McGill, is rehearsing his defense address in the men's washroom, rather jokingly, as security comes down to remind him, hey, come to the courtroom.
I just want to touch upon the audio in this scene again. It is a complete contrast to the prior scene, where there's empty feeling of emptiness. The same audio effect was used. Silence with very quiet noises at very large audio sounds levels. And here it's a sense of anticipation more than it is a feeling of loneliness in the prior scene. This is anticipation of this lawyer making a grand entrance. And lo and behold, he ends up doing just that.
So Jimmy, of course, working as a public defender, you're going to end up being stuck with a lot of cases that can be pretty crappy given on the different sort of characters one would meet across the United States. And this could be anywhere. If you're working as a lawyer in Canada, there's all kinds of crimes that are being committed, and ultimately a lot of these will play out in court. Even ridiculous circumstances such as this, as Jimmy is defending 3 19-year-olds on trial for basically public masturbation in a biology classroom.
And that's the least of the charges.
And he gives a speech to the jury on what it was like to be 19. It's very grandiose. Misguided decisions were made. He's trying to create relatability to the teens. And Alex, I know somebody, you entering the law profession. Tell me what you think about Jimmy's strategy, even in what might be a ridiculous case, how important it is to try and, as the defendant, relate to your jury.
He does a fine job, and as you'll see further into the series, his initial impression as a people person is on point. He, as you said, relates to them quite easily, and he tries the strategy of downplaying, right? Relating to their age, their naivety, and the situation. Downplaying is nothing more than one with a prank, right? But rather well into great comedic effect, the prosecutor ends up bringing videotape. And what displays on there, Joseph?
It's quite a funny display of 3 people, 3 teens getting it on with a human skeleton, to put it lightly, folks.
Yes.
So Jimmy is disgusted that he has to deal with these clients, but as the series goes on, he deals more and more with them, which might ultimately lead him to change his persona and kind of his law practice, as we'll see later on. But we don't really officially get the outcome. These teens are going to jail, so Jimmy might have helped them get a lower reduced sentence. But anyway, it cuts to Jimmy receiving a check for $700. He's arguing with the county clerk, who we see quite a few times. He's saying, hey, how come I don't get my $2,100 per the 3 defendants? But he has to settle for the $700. And there's a great line, they had sex with a head. And then Jimmy proceeds to his, I have to look this up, 1998 Suzuki Esteem, where he receives a call from Betsy Kettleman, a woman looking to speak with Jimmy. And Jimmy pretends he has a secretary, which I kind of have to think about a little bit there, that he's actually trying to fool her with a separate voice, and his own law office at that, so he has his own staff. He tries to do a woman's high-pitched voice, and he sets up a meeting at Loyola's Cafe for 4 o'clock. Now, interesting note, Alex and I were discussing, Loyola's is a reference to Breaking Bad. Alex, what do you make of a return to a cafe that had been used a few times throughout the original series?
And will continue to be used in Better Call Saul, as we'll see further along. But it's something that's seen in the show repeatedly, callbacks to Breaking Bad naturally. It's set in the same area, so it only makes sense, but it's just these little snippets you'll see every once in a while that is reference.
So as Jimmy approaches the parking booth, he's going to be leaving the court. he encounters a Breaking Bad favorite, a younger Mike Ehrmantraut, at the booth. Now, this is his day job, and he's kind of got a bit of a dour demeanor to him. He wants Jimmy to pay $3 for the parking fees or get more validating stickers. And there's a couple of great quote exchanges from the two men who don't know each other yet, but become very familiar with each other on Breaking Bad. With Jimmy, "I was in that courtroom back there saving people's lives." And then from Mike, "Thank you for restoring my faith in the judicial system." And then with Jimmy, "Fine, you win. Hooray for you. Employee of the month over here. Yeah." So, part of my terrible impressions. Alex, I have to ask what your thoughts were on this first interaction between two very prominent characters later on in Breaking Bad.
It gives rise to the characters, honestly. You see Jimmy as an absurd person to a degree, but one that is, as the scenes prior allude to, is quite downtrodden in this first episode anyways. So when he runs into the stoic Mike Ehrmantraut, he ends up exploding a little bit because everything prior to that has not been going his way. He ends up failing to get his clients off. He fails to get enough money, as we'll see, and even shows snippets of what could be his present. A nice car is shot by Vince, and then slides over to his actual vehicle. His present is not going great, and when he runs into Mike, it goes that much further, shows how much he's been facing. His reaction is quite appropriate.
So we cut to Loyola's diner, and Betsy and Craig Kettleman are discussing a potential court case of Craig, the husband, essentially embezzling money from the treasury. And quite a figure at that, $1.6 million missing from the county treasury, which will be discussed later as we go through season 1. And Craig is the treasurer. So Jimmy in this scene is trying to sell himself, basically his services, to be their potential lawyer, and it could be a big client for him, which is significant. So there is definitely motivation on his part. Jimmy's anticipating they'll take him on, but ultimately the wife disapproves, and Jimmy's kind of left feeling dismayed as he's driving away in his Suzuki Esteem. While on the phone, he is approaching a corner and accidentally runs into a man on a skateboard with his brother at the scene of the crime, conveniently with a video camera, which may raise some suspicion. These two guys are looking for money and what to do to make things right, basically. They approach Jimmy, and one of the brothers wants $500. Jimmy, who has a history, as we'll talk about, of scamming people, realizes this is a scam and calls the two the Starlight Express. And there's a great line here with that: the only way that steaming pile of crap is worth $500 is if there's a $300 hooker sitting in it. So we get that line from him, and the two punks run away after Jimmy asks them for money for the windshield, as they know they were basically caught in their con scheme. Now, in a Vietnamese nail and feet salon, Jimmy greets all the Vietnamese women with a beloved phrase of mine in the series, "Cho ca co, ladies," meaning hello, ladies, in Vietnamese. They all greet him back with "Chao an," which means hello, older, superior male. Jimmy talks with Mrs. Nguyen and tries to get his cucumber water. Cucumber water is for the customers only. And then heads back into the laundry room of the salon, where a very, very small office lies with the hastily marked sign, "James M. McGill, Esquire, a law corporation," reads on the door. With 0 messages on voicemail, Jimmy sits looking at a list of urgent bank notices, past due credit statements, and comes across a check from a law firm, HHM, for Jimmy for $26,000. Jimmy rips the check in half, and that concludes the scene.
I want to bring up a point here. This is incredibly important claim that Vince is trying to come across. We've seen throughout the episode that he's down on his luck. He has money issues. But he's also a bit of a shady scumbag lawyer at this point. You see him defending clients that even the nail salon employees reprehensible, right? We see him driving a vehicle that is barely worth $200, let alone as much as a hooker potentially. And we see the amount of bills stacked up, yet he still rips this $26,000 check up on first sight. We see that despite his nature as a lawyer and his monetary situation, he still stands for something. And what does the next scene allude to?
Well, the next scene alludes to Jimmy going to the Hamlin and McGill, the HHM, a very prominent law firm in New Mexico. Before we get to that, I want to hear your thoughts on, like, again, someone with you entering the law profession, your first time seeing this, what was your thought of that ridiculous court case in the beginning?
I thought the way that Vince filmed it was done to great comedic effect. The way that Jimmy downplayed it as if it was no big crime whatsoever, and the prosecutor, funny enough, without saying a word, bringing over the tape and letting it speak for itself in front of everyone. You see the back of the courthouse. It must be a very popular case because there's quite a lot of people in the back. Go over just to the one side in order to see the tape, and we see him standing for people that the community thinks not quite much of, to say the least. And
people seem to know about it because when Jimmy talks to Mrs. Nguyen, even in the hair salon, the nail salon, I should say rather, she knows about it. So word had got spreading around in the paper that this ridiculous crime had made windfall across Albuquerque. Tell me what you think of the Kettlemans falling through as Jimmy's first potential big client.
I think, again, Vince's direction and production show that Jimmy is almost making a joke of it. Is dog licking his lips at a meal right in front of him. Deal in the making, and which is stopped short by Mrs. Kettleman. And we're given a little bit of characterization of the two. Not as bright characters, but ones that are potentially important because of their actions. Which, $1.6 million, just a discrepancy that has gone missing.
Bet you a lot of people would be happy with $1.6 million right now.
Would, but it's something that they'll talk about in future. And with this episode, there's a lot of characters being introduced. And for first-time watchers, it wouldn't surprise me if you missed a couple of their names. But as episodes go along, you'll see these characters more and more.
And then when we get to the scam with these two skateboarders, tell me what you thought of the writing there. I personally, for me, I haven't seen too much of this happen in Canada before. There will be people that are trying to come up with shady ways to make a few bucks. What do you think of people willing to sacrifice their body illegally to try and make a few bucks, and potentially horrifically injuring yourself?
Insurance fraud has been a thing for quite many years, and they're obviously doing a much smaller version of it, trying to extort the people by pretending to be injured. As you can see that in that scene more closely, you can see one of the brothers at the corner. I'm not sure if you caught it the first time you were watching.
I might not have.
He signals to the other one as he's turning the corner, and as the viewer, you don't get sight of him until he crashes into the windshield. But it's just a little Easter egg that I picked up there on my second time watching through. Yeah,
that's the great thing about rewatching a series, folks. I think before we go into the next scene, it's really interesting to note. So with Jimmy's car, for the viewers out there, it's this really old Suzuki, and it's a yellow, rusted up car with the rear passenger door one of them being orange, while the rest of the car is yellow. So, it suggests Jimmy was pretty hastily, he needed another door, maybe he got into an accident. Yeah. And this whole episode, as we'll talk about later, it really gets in the idea of how desperate Jimmy is to make a few bucks and get noticed. The signs are all there in the beginning of the series. He is not a wealthy man. We see the credit statements. We see him arguing with the county clerk for more money based on the number of defenders. His car, it looks like it's on its last legs. His exchange with the two con artists, and the fact that his law office is in the back of a nail salon next to a washer and dryer. All the signs are there. And, Alex, I'll ask you this, like, in terms of Jimmy's feasibility to continue, is this a person who's living day to day? Is this a character rather that is close to borderline bankruptcy? What do you think? How close is Jimmy in the beginning of the series from basically almost having nothing?
Well, in the scene where you see all the bills piling up, it speaks for itself. Payment past due. These bills are all there, yet he still tears up that check, which I think is incredibly important contrast.
And that is made out to Jimmy.
That is made out to Jimmy, yes.
I was in that court back there, saving people's lives, so...
Oh, gee, that's swell. And thank you for restoring my faith in the judicial system. Now you either pay the $3, or you go back inside and you get an additional sticker.
Fine, you win. Hooray for you.
Employee of the month over here. Yeah! Hooray! Give him a medal.
So as we go into scene 3, Jimmy, of course, he enters the law offices of HHM. We are introduced to Hamlin, and McGill, a very classic kind of, American, Canadian. You drive around, you see the different law firms. There's usually typically 2 or 3 major partners, and in the case of in Better Call Saul, we see that. Jimmy interrupts a meeting between some of the lawyers, and one of the key partners, Howard Hamlin and Kim Wexler, are introduced in the room.
I just want to talk about something quite before we get to that.
Sure.
As he enters the law firm, it's only something that I picked up on my second go watching through, is just small detail of how familiar he is. He's familiar with where the conference rooms are. He's familiar with every single lawyer that he talks to as he goes along. It's just small detail like that brings light to the next scene where he introduces the concept of his brother.
Jimmy has a history here at this law firm, which we'll talk about later in the series, and there's a reason we'll find out why he never really ended up joining the firm. And we'll talk about that. But so in this scene, Jimmy bolsters into the room, and he's insulted by the check for $26,000. He drops the pieces of shredded paper on the table and basically insists it is a joke. And he's got this great line, "You are messing with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Hamlin, and I won't have it." It is a reference to Warren Beatty from Network, and "you will atone." So he's insisting that the check is a joke based on what his brother Chuck McGill, this is the first mention of his brother, what he's meant to the firm. Jimmy is insisting his brother should be cashed out of the firm, but what's important right here is we don't know why at this point, if you're a new viewer to the show. It's based on a condition that has kept his brother at home, and we find out this has been going on for a year. Howard doesn't seem to believe what Jimmy has to say, and Howard insists it's an extended sabbatical, and they'd like to keep him on. And this is a really interesting scene because it's setting up a continuing feud and bitterness between James, and Howard.
It's a scene that's given far more context when rewatching, for sure, because, as you said, the reasons behind it are only revealed later. So rewatching it again, you sort of get that context already in place. And talking about how Howard sees it as something that can be overcome in the near future, whereas Jimmy sees it as something that it's permanently out. he talks about retirement almost, as if this is the end of the line for his brother in the field of law.
Now, before Jimmy leaves, he overhears, who we've just seen in the earlier part of the episode, Betsy and Craig Kettleman. Jimmy appears looking down towards the bottom of the first floor of the law firm, and it appears HHM and Howard have taken them in as clients. And Jimmy, frustrated about this meeting, sees him beat up a garbage can in the elevator lobby downstairs. And there's a great shot of him walking out of the room to find Kim waiting there for him with a cigarette. Both stand in silence for a moment, and there's a great shot composition here in this part of the scene. Jimmy says, they're silent for the most part. He just says, "Couldn't you just?" Kim says, "No, I couldn't," and walks away, returning to the firm, marking the end of the scene.
This is the first time we see Kim Wexler in the conference room before, and the one-on-one together. She will be an important character going further into the series. And we see her as a member of the firm who is unable to help her friend in the situation, as she's dealing with higher-ups. She's not quite in that position where she can influence anything yet.
As we approach the end of this scene, there's an interesting Easter egg again to the beloved Breaking Bad, where we see Jimmy beat up this trash can. It's actually paying homage to Walt in what I believe is the second season of Breaking Bad. This is after finding out about his cancer diagnosis. He beats up a mirror, a steel mirror in a bathroom as well. So there's a little bit of homage there. What do you think, Alex? I had marked down here. What do you think of the exchange between Jimmy and Howard in the boardroom? Howard's kind of coming off as this, jovial kind of bigot who, like, he's clearly in control here, and Jimmy's kind of coming in. You even hear them on the phone saying, "Do we need security?" Howard says, no, it's okay. I've got this.
We see Jimmy as an obscene character when he bursts into a conference room in meeting that's happening without care, overtaking it with a quote that's just ridiculous, as is hilarious. Shows that he has no fear of the people in here. It alludes to that comfortability that he had beforehand and familiarity that he has with the firm. And most importantly, it shows that he feels he definitely has a claim and a stake with his brother's interest in his firm. That he truly does feel that he is owed 1/3 of everything there.
As we approach what I would say is the fourth scene of this great episode, Jimmy is driving down a dark street to his brother Chuck's house. It's evening now. He removes all of his electronic devices from him, kind of weird, puts them in the mailbox as the term grounding gets heard in a few moments here. And this is the first appearance of Chuck McGill in a pitch dark home. Jimmy lights a gas lantern. He puts ice in a cooler for groceries. They talk about electromagnetic fields, and then they get into a very interesting and heated discussion on Chuck cashing out, as Jimmy tells him, "Look, I'm going under working public defender cases." Alex, what do you think of this introduction of Chuck's house? It comes across as very mysterious. How do you think a person is able to live like this, where we're essentially alluding to Chuck has a phobia, a fear of electromagnetism. So any device, cell phone, computer, anything that would emit electromagnetic charge, he cannot have in his house. So he's essentially almost living like a pioneer, almost very Wild West kind of, if you're, imagining maybe like pre-Civil War, almost even to put in a timeline. What do you think of this first introduction of Chuck's house?
It's shown as a character who's suffering from something, clearly. And we don't know quite what yet. But as you said, it's candlelight, lanterns, and almost space-looking blankets along the house and wrapped in. He's a character that is obviously important to Jimmy, bringing groceries, something that he goes out of his way to prepare going into the place. And also one that, despite this, he still is a bit at odds with Jimmy, you see.
We can see here Jimmy is taking care of his older brother, Chuck. Michael McKean does an excellent job in the 3 seasons that he plays Chuck McGill. Chuck is a very educated man. He knows the law like the back of his hand. Very, very well spoken, and knows his place in Albuquerque Law Society. He is a big player. He's a big time partner. He is the McGill in HH&M. So as we wrap up this part of the scene, the interesting conversation comes up as Chuck says he's going to beat what's ailing him. Note from the previous scene, this has been carried on for a year already, folks, so this is quite concerning. And there's a very interesting line exchange that develops between the two brothers, with Chuck saying to Jimmy he should consider changing his law practice name of James M. McGill Esquire to remove confusion over HHM, Hamlin, and McGill, among potential future clients. And Jimmy is flabbergasted to hear the suggestion from his brother, who clearly has Howard in his other ear. And with Chuck saying, "Why ride on someone else's coattails? Wouldn't you rather build your own identity?" And rewatching this scene, Jimmy ends up leaving the house, and that concludes it. Rewatching it for a second and third time becomes very interesting. As we know in Breaking Bad, foreshadowing, James McGill, is under the persona of Saul Goodman. And when I heard this line, "Wouldn't you rather build your own identity?" a light bulb went over my head, and I was like, wow, this is really good writing from Vince and Peter already. They're kind of hinting that, is Chuck going to slowly start pushing Jimmy, that he's got to find himself and go in another direction? Because Jimmy still wants to keep his name. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Alex.
Yeah, we see, as I said before, they're a little bit at odds with one another. We see Jimmy, who wants to continue on with his brother's name, but McGill names apparently doesn't. Yeah,
it's not good enough for Jimmy.
No.
As we go into the next scene, Jimmy finds the 2 con artists at a skate park in town, quite a large skate park at that, and ironically, he's telling them about his own past in Cicero, Illinois, which we might not know right away, but he's talking about, it's a Chicago suburb. He's talking about this character slipping Jimmy. He offers to help make them $2,000 by essentially setting up the same scheme they tried on him with the Kettlemans. He's trying to rip them off because Jimmy knows the Kettlemans have deep pockets, and Betsy, the wife and the mother, they have 2 kids, could be a good target. So they set up a plan, and Jimmy walks away. It's rather short, but it's ultimately setting up how the episode's going to wrap up. I want to get your thoughts, Alex, on Jimmy reapproaching these 2 guys and looking to see if he'll join them in on this con scheme.
You sort of get a sense of Jimmy is sick of his situation. You see him, he's sort of had enough of being the recipient of this bad luck that's upon him. He's told by his brother in the scene before, why don't you go out and make your own name for yourself, right? And he thinks back to his past there, as he says, slipping Jimmy. And he goes back into the persona that he has of one, not a small amount of a con artist, but one that takes advantage of people's foolishness, honestly.
As we see later on in the first season, it will be very important. There'll be a couple of flashbacks, which I'll be excited to talk about, where we see Jimmy back in Cicero, Illinois, with a good buddy of his, and we'll see some of the schemes that Jimmy and this other fellow were able to pull, scheming people at a Chicago bar. So that'll be interesting to discuss. So in the final scene, Jimmy is rehearsing his lines in the car. He's practicing what he'd like to say to the Kettlemans, who are his ideal client. Meanwhile, the hit and run occurs. The brothers find a station wagon but the driver, oddly enough, drives away. Now, the skateboarders manage to chase after the driver. They hitch a ride with a truck following close behind, and the driver pulls up to a house on a quiet side street. Now, an old Spanish woman is approached by the two skateboarders, clearly not Betsy Kettleman. So things are starting to go awry here without the audience realizing, potentially, and asking for money. And the old woman, who only speaks Spanish, doesn't understand, no entiendo, and brings them into the house. Jimmy is trying to exchange phone calls with the brothers, and the brothers are thinking, well, Jimmy tells them, this is a hit and run, you can make some more money. So then they're saying, why do we need him? So they might be trying to cut Jimmy out of the picture. So Jimmy miraculously manages to find the house and the smashed windshield on the station wagon. He approaches the door and is greeted with a gun pointed at his face. Open up, officer of the court. The camera changes to a medium close-up of none other than Tuco Salamanca, who brings Jimmy into the house at gunpoint, concluding the episode.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Hamlin, and I won't have it! And you will atone!
It's Ned Beatty from Network. For Christ's sakes, guys. Open up, officer of the court! Open up in the name of the law! Good afternoon,
So, Alex, I have to ask your initial impression when you saw this final scene of the first episode. Raymond Cruz played an awesome job as a guest actor portraying Tuco Salamanca as kind of series regular for a bunch of episodes in Breaking Bad. What was your impression when you saw that ending, that last scene?
There's the hook, and next episode will be the line and sinker. We're left with a cliffhanger here. One of returning character, quite famous in Breaking Bad, of course. And we know how dangerous he can be, so we're immediately worrying for Jimmy.
How did this scene draw viewers in who had previously seen Breaking Bad?
Like I said, he's quite a dangerous character. He's one that's unpredictable at best, is the best way to put it. One that can go off at the slightest thing. And here he has Jimmy at gunpoint. So we have the cliffhanger here, and we're waiting for the next episode.
Yeah, for me, the first time I saw it, it didn't have as much of an impact. I recognized that, okay, this is going to be a cliffhanger. This is obviously, they're not going to just leave Jimmy in the house. This is going to go somewhere. And I didn't know at first that this was Tuco Salamanca. Upon watching Breaking Bad later on, I thought, okay, this is really cool. And I recognized this guy looks like he's part of the cartel, which I knew would be a major portion of what the show would ultimately become. And I loved it. Before I share mine, I'll just get your thoughts. Tell me what you thought of this first episode of the series as a whole.
It's a great episode. One that is given far more context in the second time viewing around. And I must say, this is a trend we'll see further in different episodes, but rewatching it, seeing Jimmy and his brother interact and seeing the consequences of how Jimmy is pushed away from his brother and how he goes down that darker path closer towards Saul Goodman. And we see immediately the first consequences as a result. Interaction with a member of the cartel.
And Jimmy ultimately, that's an astute point, Alex. Jimmy doesn't need to get into the con life again. That was his past in Chicago. We'll see it throughout the series, and we saw it a bit in Breaking Bad. Jimmy puts himself in a lot of danger in the first episode. As a new viewer to the series at the time, as I hadn't seen Breaking Bad, I loved it. I thought it was really well done. It was a slow pace. We'll see throughout the series, things move slowly.
For sure.
They're really trying to establish the major characters of the show. And I liked that the show's got there's a bit of humor to this comedy, you know. Out of all the things that they could have shown in the beginning, they showed Jimmy defending a bunch of people who've committed just this ridiculous, gross act to get your interest like that, you know. The cliffhanger at the end. This first episode, to me, I think the biggest overall takeaway, as I said before, Jimmy is not a wealthy man. He is trying to do everything he can to scrape together a few bucks. And you see at his law office, he's got a bed in there, a foldable out couch. You know, can he ultimately make a name for himself and make a few bucks along the way? We will see as we continue this podcast, but yeah, Alex, I really enjoyed it. I'll just ask, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to mention?
For sure. The first episode does a wonderful job at establishing itself with references to Breaking Bad. The ties are inherently there throughout the episode. The Easter eggs, left, right, and center. The characters returning in the form of Tuco, and as you will see in later episodes, even more come to the forefront. But it also does a great job as establishing itself as its own. Like you said, the comedy is there. It's different form than Breaking Bad, and you'll see, obviously, in relation to the law, the court, and the funny nuances with it continue in later episodes.
I think one of the really interesting things for people that are new to this show, by the time we got to 2015, Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould, two of the head creators, they'd been working with each other since 2008. Where we are now in 2021, we're going to be entering the 6th season of this show, and this same writing team has been together for over a decade, which is really remarkable. It doesn't happen a lot in the television industry anymore. They are two different shows, yes, but ultimately when you're writing about the same universe, the writing should, in theory, get better. Shout out to, those Game of Thrones fans out there. Maybe they would argue a little bit different. The show can,
they would argue.
There are some shows that can go the wrong way too. But this is a really interesting universe that they've created. And I think you will find, if you're new to the show and if you want to give it a try, I would highly recommend it as the show gets better over time, like a fine wine. This has been Uno, the first episode of Better Call Saul, and we're really excited to cover this whole series in the podcast. The truth is how you look at it. Alex, I'm really happy to have you on the show with me.
Always happy to be here.
And we're going to try and make this a weekly show for you folks out there. We're recording from Winnipeg, Manitoba, our hometown that we love very much. And
I will have much more to discuss in future episodes, and we'll be glad to hear of your guys' perspective and opinions on these episodes as we go along.
So until next time, this is Joseph Bernacki and Alex Kraus signing off for the inaugural episode of The Truth is How You Look at It, a Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad podcast. Thanks, guys. Take it easy. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode of the podcast. Our show's theme is The House, recorded by Adrian Behringer, and music featured on the show was In the Shadows, recorded by Bruce Zimmerman, and The Blues School, recorded by Bobby Cole. Until next week, we'll catch y'all on the flip side. The Truth is How You Look at It is a Bernacki and Kraus production.